Celluloid Heart presents Cold Crematorium, the film cinema never dared to make.
Okay, picture this. You're a film producer. You've got this, I don't know, plush office in Hollywood. You're looking out over the hills. It's a Tuesday.
The classic Tuesday.
The classic Tuesday. And you are just bored out of your mind. You're sifting through scripts, another superhero sequel, a rom-com, the usual stuff. Then a courier drops this heavy yellowed envelope on your desk. You open it up. It's a manuscript, a screenplay.
All right, I'm with you. What's the pitch?
The pitch is this. It's a story, right, written in 1950. It has the visceral, gut-punching reality of something like Schindler's List, but it's somehow darker, it's grittier.
Darker than Schindler's List. That's a high bar.
It is, and it's got the psychological depth of, I don't know, a Dostoevsky novel.
Yeah.
You're inside the heads of people making these absolutely impossible choices. And the setting, it's a place almost no one has ever seen on screen before. It's a masterpiece. It's raw, it's angry, and it's brilliant.
Sounds like an Oscar winner to me. So what's the catch? There's always a catch.
The catch is that you can't make it. In fact, nobody could make it. You're told this script has been buried in a vault for 75 years. Not lost buried, deliberately ignored.
Because it wasn't good enough.
No, because it was inconvenient.
Inconvenient. That's a very heavy word to use for a story like that.
It is, isn't it? Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we are doing something a little bit different. We're not just reviewing a book. We're going to take this piece of lost history, a book called Cold Crematorium by József Debreczeni, and we're going to produce it.
Okay.
We're going to look at it through the lens of a hypothetical film. We'll scout the locations, we'll cast the characters, and we'll break down the script to really understand why this book is completely shaking up our understanding of the Holocaust.
I love this framing because, having read Cold Crematorium or Heilig Crematorium in the original Hungarian, it actually reads like a screenplay. It doesn't feel like a diary. It has this visual, almost merciless precision.
Merciless is the word.
It is. But before we, yell action, we really need to understand what we're holding in our hands. This isn't just another memoir. It is a report from a part of hell that history almost forgot.
I have to stop you on the title, though. Cold Crematorium. It just stops you in your tracks. When I think of the Holocaust, unfortunately, the first image that comes to my mind is the industrial machinery. The gas chambers, the fire, the smoke, that's the horror we know.
And that's the hot crematorium, if you will. That's the industrial destruction of Auschwitz-Birkenau. And Debreczeni, he starts there. He absolutely does. But his book, and our movie today, moves past that. He describes a different kind of death.
The Cold Crematorium.
The Cold Crematorium. It refers to the forced labor camps, specifically in the final chaotic months of the war. There was no gas. There was no fire.
So how do you have a crematorium without fire?
Entropy.
Entropy. Like physics.
It's exactly like physics. Death by thermodynamics. It's death by degrees. You die because you run out of calories, you run out of body heat, and eventually you just run out of hope. It's death by filth, by hunger, by freezing cold. And it's a slower, you could argue, a much more cruel process because it allows time for the human mind to observe its own decay. In a gas chamber, it's over in minutes. It's terrifying, but it's fast. In the cold crematorium, you rot while you are still breathing.
That is bleak. But it sets the stage perfectly. So, all right, let's look at our screenwriter, the author József Debreczeni. If we're pitching this movie, who is this guy? Because reading this, he does not sound like the typical survivor who writes their memoir 30 years later to, process the trauma. The voice is just so different.
It's completely different, and that's the absolute key distinction here. Debreczeni was born József Brunner in Budapest in 1905. So he wasn't a kid when this happened. He was a fully formed adult, an intellectual, a poet, a respected journalist from Vojvodina. He was a sophisticated urban man of letters.
So he goes into the camps, not with the wide, terrified eyes of a child, but with the eyes of a reporter.
A reporter and a cynic. He calls himself an observer trained in hell. I mean, think about the other big names we all know. Elie Wiesel wrote Night, which is a beautiful, devastating book, but it's about a theological crisis. It's a young boy watching his faith burn to ash.
Right.
Then you have Primo Levi, who wrote If This Is a Man, which is this calm, almost philosophical detachment. He's like a scientist looking at a lab experiment, analyzing the breaking points of humanity.
Right. Levi is so composed, it's chilling.
Debreczeni is not composed, not at all. He is angry, he's acerbic, he is deeply, darkly ironic. And most importantly, he wrote this immediately. It was published in 1950 in Yugoslavia.
So the ink was barely dry on history. He didn't have 20 or 30 years to soften the edges to find a narrative.
Precisely. There is no filter of time. He writes like a war correspondent who is embedded in the worst place on Earth. He reports on bodily fluids, on the specific texture of lice, on the moral corruption of his fellow prisoners. He doesn't look away. He doesn't even try to find a silver lining or some grand moral lesson. He just points his camera and says, look at this ugliness.
Okay, so we have this incredible script written by a professional journalist while the memories are acid fresh. It's visceral, it's brilliant. So why am I only hearing about it now? Why are we only reading this in English in 2024? This feels like a geopolitical thriller before we even get to the camps. You said it was inconvenient.
It is absolutely a geopolitical thriller. This is the mystery of the shelved project. You see, the book was published in Yugoslavia in 1950. It won awards there. It was recognized by people who read it as a masterpiece. But then it just vanished from the global stage.
Vanish? How do you lose a masterpiece?
You don't lose it, you bury it. And it got caught in the gears of the Cold War. Debreczeni's own brother, Alexander Brunner, he was a diplomat, he had connections, he tried to sell the manuscript to American publishers in the 1950s, he went to all the big houses in New York. Everyone said no.
Why? I mean, was it too graphic? Was it just too depressing for an audience that wanted to move on?
That was certainly part of it, which we'll get to. But the main reason, the real deal breaker, was the ending. Spoiler alert for our movie, but we have to talk about the third act. In the final act of the book, the camps are liberated.
Right. And geographically, those camps in Silesia were liberated by the Soviets. That's just historical fact.
Correct. But Debreczeni portrays the Soviet Red Army not as the scary communist menace that America was terrified of in the 50s, but as human beings. He describes Soviet soldiers, kids mostly, feeding the skeletal survivors, caring for them, offering them bread, washing them. These moments of profound tenderness.
Okay, I see exactly where this is going.
Now, you have to imagine you are a publisher in McCarthy-era America. It's 1954. The Red Scare is in full swing. Hollywood figures are being blacklisted for even perceived communist sympathies, and someone drops a book on your desk where the heroes of the climax are the Russians.
You can't print that. You physically cannot print that. It's a commercial death sentence.
It's toxic. Humanizing the Soviets was commercially and politically toxic. If you wanted to sell a Holocaust memoir in 1955 America, the narrative had to fit the Western worldview. It had to be about the evil Nazis and ideally the heroic American or British liberators, or if the Soviets were there, they had to be sort of cold and distant occupiers, a story where the Russians are the tender saviors. Unpublishable.
That is just wild to think about. We think of censorship as, government agents banning books, but sometimes it's just about what fits the narrative of the moment. It's soft censorship, the censorship of the market.
And there was internal resistance, too. Even within the Jewish community in America. Jewish American publishers at the time were very focused on assimilation, on rebuilding, on showing that Jews were good Americans.
On not rocking the boat.
Exactly. And there was a genuine fear that a book this graphic, which shows Jews acting badly, shows Jews acting as kapos and tormenting each other, they were afraid it would inflame anti-Semitism. They thought it was too cruel. They thought it was airing the dirty laundry in public.
So it was buried. It was put in the vault. For all the wrong reasons.
Until now. It's finally been translated, and we can finally see what we missed. And what we missed is, among other things, a setting that completely changes our understanding of the geography of the Holocaust.
Okay, let's get into pre-production then. Let's talk about that setting. If we are scouting locations for this production, where are we actually going? Because you said it's not just Auschwitz.
No. We start in Auschwitz, that's Act 1, the land of Auschwitz. It's May 1944. Debreczeni is 39 years old, and he describes what he calls the 45-minute life expectancy.
45 minutes? What does that even mean?
It's the time it takes to get off the train, get herded to the selection ramp, and be sent left or right by the SS doctor. Left to the gas, right to slave labor. In 45 minutes, your entire existence, your entire past is decided by a flick of a thumb.
That immediately establishes the stakes. It's just high-octane horror right from the jump. There's no build-up.
None at all. But then the plot moves. And this is the unique historical contribution of the book. He gets selected for labor, and he gets moved to Project Reese.
Project Reese? I have to be honest, I've never heard of that. It sounds like something out of a James Bond movie, a villain scheme.
It translates to Project Giant, and it was exactly that. It was a top-secret, colossal Nazi construction project in the Owl Mountains of Lower Silesia. This wasn't a camp in the way we think of one. This was an entire landscape being re-engineered.
What were they building?
That's part of the mystery. They were carving out entire mountains, building these massive tunnels and bunkers. Some historians say it was going to be a new impregnable headquarters for Hitler, a new wolf's lair. Others say it was for underground arms factories to be V-2 rockets, safe from Allied bombers. But the scale was pharaonic.
Pharaonic, you mean like building the pyramids?
Exactly like building the pyramids,
Yeah.
but with modern cruelty and dynamite. They were moving mountains with human hands, with slave labor.
So if we're filming this, we're not in the flat, muddy fields of Poland that we're so used to seeing. We're in the mountains.
Yes, the entire visual texture changes completely, and we have three main sets here for our movie. First, there's A.L. Falkenberg. This was the main excavation site. So you have to imagine thousands of men in striped pajamas, emaciated, laboring inside a hollowed-out mountain, hacking away at granite and gneiss with pickaxes, breathing in dust with almost no food, the darkness, the echoes, the noise.
And the second set.
This is the one that really stays with me. A.L. Fürstenstein. This is just so incredibly cinematic. They were tunneling directly underneath a majestic castle.
A castle, you mean like a literal fairy tale castle?
Yes, the Kew Castle. It's this beautiful Baroque palace perched on a hill. It was being retrofitted to be a personal residence for Hitler. So you have this insane vertical contrast. Up above, you have chandeliers, velvet curtains, gold leaf, the absolute height of European culture. And then directly underneath, in the mud and the dark, slaves are dying to build him a private elevator shaft.
That is, the metaphor is just screaming at you. The literal high culture of Europe resting on a foundation of bones.
It's horrifying. It's almost too on the nose for a film, but it was real. But the true horror, the central set of our film, the place where the cold crematorium actually exists, is the third location, Ale Dernhow.
And this was the hospital camp, right?
Yeah.
Put that in quotes.
I use the word hospital very, very loosely. Technically, it was a Krankenlager. In the Nazi administrative logic, if you were too sick or too broken to work in the tunnels of Project Reese, you were sent to Dernhow to, well, theoretically to recover.
But I'm guessing nobody recovered.
No. In reality, it was a dumping ground. It was an end-of-the-line station. It was a converted carpet factory. So imagine a large, cold industrial space, stripped bare, no hygiene facilities, no medicine, not even an aspirin.
So what was the set dressing of this place?
Debreczeni describes it with stomach-churning detail. He talks about blankets swarming with silvery colonies of larvae.
Wait, larvae, you mean?
Lice, millions and millions of them. He says the blankets seemed to move on their own because there were so many lice. He describes yellow flows of dysentery running down the rows of tiered bunks because the men were too weak to get up.
I can't even begin to imagine the smell.
He describes that too. It's this sweet, rotting smell of decay. And the mechanism of death here isn't a soldier shooting you, though that certainly happened. The main mechanism is silence. There are no gas chambers hissing. There are no ovens roaring. It's just men lying in their own filth, waiting for their body temperature to drop below the threshold of life. That is the cold crematorium. It's a place where the Nazis just let nature take its course.
It's a scene of pure entropy. Just things falling apart, including human bodies. Okay, so we have our set. It's terrifying. It's distinct from anything we've seen before. Now we need our cast. And this is where Debreczeni really, I think, differentiates himself from other writers. He does not paint the prisoners as saints. He doesn't give us the noble victim trope at all.
No, and this is why it was so controversial at the time. He explores the gray zone, to borrow Primo Levi's term. But Debreczeni is perhaps even more aggressive about it. He shows us the moral ambiguity of survival in excruciating detail. In this movie, the good guys aren't always good.
So let's talk about the Weiss brothers. If I'm a casting director, I'm looking for two actors who look similar, maybe they're even twins, but who have to project completely different inner worlds.
It's a perfect study in contrast. Two brothers, same background, same blood, same desperate situation. They arrive at the camp together, but they take two radically divergent moral paths.
Okay, tell us about Brother A.
Let's call him Paul Weiss. Debreczeni calls him the White Crow, which is a fascinating term. He manages to navigate the camp bureaucracy and becomes a storekeeper. Now, in the economy of a concentration camp, being a storekeeper makes you a king. He has access to bread, he has access to margarine, he has power.
So he's a collaborator. Is that how we should see him?
Well, that's the nuance, isn't it? He's an opportunist. He survives by being smart, by making deals, by playing the game. But, and this is the absolute key, he retains his humanity. He doesn't go out of his way to hurt people. He helps his brother when he can. He uses his power to stay alive, but he doesn't become a sadist. He's the guy who worked the system.
And the other brother.
The other brother becomes a monster. In civilian life, Debreczeni tells us, He was just a modest shop clerk, nobody special, probably a perfectly nice guy. But in the camp, he gets a position as a capo, a prisoner functionary who oversees other prisoners, and he completely interiorizes the violence of the aggressor. He beats his fellow prisoners, he terrorizes them to maintain his tiny sliver of status.
So he takes the abuse he's receiving from the Nazis and just passes it down the line.
Exactly. He identifies with the aggressor. It's a well-known psychological defense mechanism. If I act like the guard, I am powerful like the guard, and therefore I am safe. He becomes more Nazis than the Nazis, in a way.
That is the nature versus nurture debate playing out in real time, isn't it? Does that kind of power corrupt you, or does it just reveal who you always were deep down?
And Debreczeni doesn't give you an easy answer, he just shows it. And the cinematic tension of seeing these two brothers interact, one who kept his soul by bending the rules, and one who sold his soul to become the rule, it's just tragic. It breaks your heart more than the physical violence.
Okay, then we have Dr. Farkas. He feels like the character the audience would latch on to. He's the intellectual anchor, the Watson to Debreczeni's Sherlock Holmes.
Yes, Dr. Farkas is the intellectual anchor in this sea of filth. He's Debreczeni's companion in the bunk. And there's a line he delivers that tells you everything you need to know about him. He introduces himself by saying, "My name was Farkas, Dr. Farkas."
It was past tense. Wow.
Past tense for his life, his identity as a man, but he clings to that title, Doctor. It's his shield. It's the one thing they can't take from him. And he uses his medical training not to cure people, because he has absolutely no medicine, not even a bandage, but to analyze the situation. He and Debreczeni sit there amidst the lice and the dying, and they psychoanalyze the SI guards, they discuss literature, they maintain their civilization through clinical observation.
It's like they're fighting the dehumanization by forcing their brains to keep working. It's like, I think, therefore I am not a corpse.
Precisely. It is resistance through intellect. And then, as a counterpoint to that, you have the rabbi.
This is a truly heartbreaking character arc.
It is, and it's very hard to read. This is a young man who was a rabbi, a leader of his faith, someone the community looked to for answers from God. But in the cold crematorium, Debreczeni describes him as a hollow shell. He says there is nothing rabbinical, nothing human left in him. He's just gone.
Oh, that is absolutely brutal.
It represents the total collapse of theology in the face of this kind of suffering. You know, Elie Wiesel asks, where is God? The rabbi in this story is the answer. God is not here. The entire religious framework just collapses under the weight of the lice and the dysentery, while the secular, cynical intellect of Debreczeni and Farkas somehow endures.
That's a provocative take. Usually in these stories, faith is the thing that sustains people. We love the story of the believer who keeps praying against all odds. Debreczeni is saying, no, irony sustains you, detachment sustains you.
Or perhaps he's saying that faith is a luxury that requires a certain baseline of physical existence. When you are reduced to a biological object, when you become what the camps called a musulman, a walking skeleton, theology evaporates. All that's left is the biological imperative for food.
That term, musulman, we should probably explain that for listeners. It's a very specific piece of camp slang.
Yes. It was the term for prisoners who had given up. The ones who were so emaciated, so exhausted that they stopped reacting to reality. They would just stare into space, often curling up or swaying slightly. They were, for all intents and purposes, the living dead. And in the cold crematorium of Dernhau, almost everyone was on the path to becoming a musulman.
And amidst all this, we also have a clear villain, but a prisoner villain. Judovics.
Yes, Judovics represents the pure pathology of power. He's a prisoner, a Jew, just like everyone else, but he enjoys the tiny bit of dominion the Nazis gave him. He illustrates that old Latin saying, homo homini lupus man is wolf to man. He isn't beating people just to survive, like the brutal vice brother might claim. He's doing it because he likes it. It gives him a rush. It's Debreczeni's way of saying, look, the Nazis didn't just kill us, they infected some of us with their own evil.
What a dark, complex cast of characters. This isn't a movie about heroes and villains in the traditional sense. It's a movie about what happens to the human soul when you squeeze it too hard.
Exactly. There's no black and white. It's all just shades of gray.
Okay, let's move to the storyboard. We have the set, the mountains, the tunnels, the filth of the factory. We have the characters, the cynic, the doctor, the brute, the lost rabbi. Now we need the scenes that really drive the point home. If we're editing this film, what are the key scenes that we absolutely cannot cut?
There are three that stand out to me as completely essential. The first is a scene I call the logic of the absurd. It involves a one-armed SS officer.
Set the scene for us.
It's roll call. Thousands of men are standing in the freezing cold, barely alive. The SS officer who is missing an arm, which just adds to this grotesque, damaged imagery, he asks the Jewish overseer to point out his best man, the best prisoner.
It sounds like a trap immediately. There's no way that ends well.
Of course. So the overseer points to a prisoner. Prisoner 46514. This man steps forward, and you can just see him trying to be impressive. He clicks his heels. He stands up as straight as he can. He's zealous, obedient, trying to show that he is a good prisoner, a model worker. He thinks, if I show them I am useful, I will live.
And what happens?
And the one-armed SS officer pulls out his pistol and shoots him in the head, point blank.
Silence. It's like that. No hesitation, no reason.
No hesitation. Bang, the man drops, and then the officer delivers the line for our script. That was a little demonstration that even the best Jew must die.
Jesus. Directorial note. That scene establishes that there are no rules. None.
Right. If this were a typical Hollywood movie, the best prisoner would eventually escape, or he'd earn the grudging respect of the guard. There's a logic to those stories. Debreczeni just shatters that entire trope. He shows that merit, obedience, excellence, they are not shields. Survival is completely random. The logic of the camp is that there is no logic. You can do everything right and still get a bullet in the brain just because a guard is bored.
Okay, scene 2. This is a much quieter moment, but visually it's just as intense. The soup analysis. This is where the writer, the journalist in him, really comes out.
This is where we use the macro lens. Our camera zooms in tight. We're looking at a rusty bowl of camp soup. But we aren't just looking at it, we're analyzing it with Debreczeni. He breaks down the chemical composition. He talks about the water content. He talks about the grit, actual sand at the bottom. He identifies the trace amounts of vegetable matter, usually rutabaga or something meant for cattle feed.
It's that scientific detachment again. He's not complaining about the taste, he's analyzing the fuel, or lack thereof.
It is. He analyzes his own starvation diet with forensic precision. It's not an emotional plea of, I was hungry. This is the precise caloric deficit required to kill a man in 3 weeks. He does the math in his head. And he realizes that the soup isn't food, it's a slow-acting poison. It gives you just enough energy to work for a few hours, but not nearly enough to repair your cells. It turns his own suffering into clinical evidence.
That is terrifying.
Yeah.
It makes the starvation feel so much more engineered, so deliberate.
Because it absolutely was.
And then scene 3, the climax of our film, The Liberation, May 1945. This is the scene that got the book banned. This is the scene that the publishers in the 50s just could not handle.
The guards have fled. The usual sounds of the camp are gone, and the silence is broken by the sound of engines. The Red Army appears. Now, you have to remember the context. These men are skeletons. They are in the cold crematorium. They are covered in lice and their own filth. They are barely human. And the Soviet soldiers who arrive, they don't conquer them, they don't interrogate them, they feed them.
It's a moment of basic human decency from the so-called enemy.
Debreczeni describes the soldiers washing the prisoners. Just imagine that tenderness. A rough, young Soviet soldier washing a typhus-ridden Jewish intellectual from Budapest, feeding them warm porridge, treating them with a dignity they haven't known in years. If we film this, we have to film it with absolute historical honesty. We have to show why the political narrative of the West, that the Soviets were these godless monsters, clashed so violently with the survivors' reality.
For Debreczeni, that Soviet soldier wasn't a geopolitical threat. He wasn't the Red Menace.
No, he was the man who gave him a piece of bread when he was hours away from death. He was the savior, period.
It really highlights how history is written by the victors, or at least by the publishers of the victors. The West just didn't want to acknowledge that for these particular men, at that particular moment, the hammer and sickle was a symbol of hope.
And it forces you, the audience, to reconcile conflicting truths. You can be anti-Soviet in 1950 politically, you can hate Stalin and the gulags, but you cannot deny the experience of the man who was saved by a Russian kid in 1945. Both things can be true. But the 1950s couldn't handle that kind of nuance.
Let's talk about the sound design for a minute, because you mentioned earlier that the cold crematorium is different from the industrial camps. If Auschwitz is loud, what does Dernhow sound like?
That's such a great question. If Auschwitz is heavy metal, clanging steel, shouting, trains screeching, the constant industrial hum, then Dernhow is ambient drone music. It's audio verite. It's minimal and terrifying.
You mean what would we hear?
Meaning we focus on the small, awful sounds. We focus on the sound of the cold.
What does cold even sound like?
It sounds like wind whistling through the gaps in a factory wall. It sounds like the wet, wheezing breath of a man with pneumonia. It sounds like the crackle of frost on a stiff, lice-infested blanket. And above all, it sounds like silence.
The silence of entropy, the sound of things winding down.
Exactly. When people are dying of starvation and disease, they don't scream. They don't have the energy to scream. Screaming takes calories they don't have. They whimper or they just stop moving. The soundscape of this film needs to be uncomfortably quiet. It should force the viewer to lean in. You should be able to hear the breathing. You should almost be able to hear the lice moving in the straw bunks.
Gosh, that is so much worse than noise.
Yeah.
The silence is heavy. And over that silence, we have the voiceover, the narrator. We said earlier that Debreczeni is ironic, so this isn't a sad, weeping voice we're hearing.
No, absolutely not. That would ruin it. If the narrator sounds like he's crying all the time, the audience just pushes away. The voiceover for this film needs to be sharp, witty even, sarcastic. Think of a classic noir detective who has seen too much, but stripped of all the coolness and glamour. It needs to be merciless, as the critics said. When he describes the lice, he shouldn't sound disgusted. He should sound like a biologist describing a new species. When he describes the brutality of the capos, he should sound like a sociologist describing a failed state. The irony is his weapon. It's what keeps him sane. It cuts through all the sentimentality.
So we've essentially built this film in our heads. We've got the script, the set, the cast, the sound. Now let's zoom out. Why does this matter now? We have Primo Levi, we have Elie Wiesel, we have The Diary of Anne Frank. Do we really need another Holocaust book?
That is the question I always ask. Is this adding anything new to the conversation? And the answer here is a resounding, unequivocal yes, because Debreczeni fills a specific, crucial gap. Well, compare him to the Titans. Primo Levi was a chemist. His books are about the systems, the rules, the perverse logic of the laboratory of humanity. He's philosophical, measured. Elie Wiesel is a theologian at heart. His work is a spiritual wrestling match with God. Debreczeni is a journalist. He is hotter, he's angrier, and he is far more willing to use the grotesque to make his point. But historically, he fills the gap of the minor labor camps.
Right, because we focus so much on the big extermination camps, Auschwitz, Treblinka.
We know Auschwitz, we know the gas chambers, we don't know the Owl Mountains. We don't know the cold crematoriums where the majority of the deaths in the final year of the war actually happened, the death marches, the starvation camps. That was the apocalyptic reality of 1945. And Debreczeni documents that specific chaos better than almost anyone I have ever read.
We should mention this isn't fiction, this is all verified. Because sometimes people say, oh, it's a memoir, maybe he embellished some details for effect.
Yeah. Absolutely, and in this case, we have corroboration. Ben Lesser, who founded the Zacher Holocaust Remembrance Foundation, was also in Dornau. He was just a teenager at the time. His testimony matches Debreczeni's perfectly. He talks about the filth, the walking skeletons, the complete lack of medicine. He remembers the specific geography of that carpet factory. This isn't just a memoir, it's a primary historical document. It's evidence.
It's just incredible to think that we almost lost it. That this crucial piece of evidence was sitting in a drawer somewhere because a publisher in 1954 didn't like the politics of the ending.
It is. This book survived its own cold crematorium. It survived the censorship, the neglect, the geopolitical freezing out. And it survived to tell us something new, something vital about the darkest chapter of human history.
So here's the final cut on our production. We have a lost masterpiece that truly rivals the greatest literature of the 20th century, finally seeing the light of day. It challenges our simple narratives about the end of the war, and it forces us to look at the physical, biological reality of death without flinching.
And it reminds us that Holocaust literature isn't a monolith. It's not just one story. It's millions of individual stories, and some of the most powerful ones, incredibly, are still waiting in the archives to be told.
And that's the thought I really want to leave you with. If a testimony as powerful, as well-written, and as historically significant as Cold Crematorium could be lost for 75 years because of the politics of the day, what else is down there? What other masterpieces are still buried in the archives of the Cold War, just waiting for a producer to open that envelope?
It's a haunting thought. There are voices we haven't heard yet, but at least, thankfully, we have this one now.
We do, and it demands to be read, or, in our case today, visualized. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us. Go find the book, read it, and see the movie in your mind. We'll see you next time.